Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with three former India's ambassadors to Afghanistan. Ambassador Rakesh Sood from 2005 to 2008. Ambassador Jayant Prasad, who followed him in 2008 up to 2010. And Ambassador Mukhopadhyay from 2010 to 2013. Also, Gautam Mukhopadhyay was reopened India's mission in 2001 when the Americans invaded Afghanistan and threw out the Taliban. Gentlemen, welcome to the Print Debates.
Thank you.
And today we're discussing, of course, the situation in Afghanistan. It's been more than 24 hours or so since the Taliban took Kabul, and those pictures of them sitting in the presidential palace in Kabul, in the Arg, posing for the cameras were quite, I think, sent a shiver down all our spines. But your first comments, Ambassador Jayant Prasad, on your take on what's happening in Afghanistan.
I think it's still early days because Taliban control is there all over the city, including the civilian part of the airport. But there is tremendous confusion everywhere. And the airport has become dysfunctional. So we'll have to give the new regime, the new Taliban regime, 3 or 4 days to settle down. But there is political confusion as well because Hekmatyar, Karzai and Abdullah were planning to go to Doha to have discussions with the Taliban delegation there. But they can't go because the airport is choked and no flights are coming in or going out. So there is utter confusion. So let the dust settle in the next 2-3 days. That's the situation on the ground, which is very murky.
Ambassador Rakesh Sood, can I come to you now and ask you, Ashraf Ghani, the president, has fled. He took with him the National Security Advisor, or shall I say the former president and the former National Security Advisor, Hamidullah Mohib. Now, Mohib's comments recently equating the Pakistani military establishment to the brothel house in Lahore, in Hira Mandi, went down quite badly with the Pakistanis. But what is interesting is that Mr. Mohib has a British passport. Ashraf Ghani is supposed to have a US green card. Now, what is going on? Do these guys even have a loyalty to their state in Afghanistan, or they've just upped and left, upped and gone?
I think it was quite clear that in any new dispensation, Ashraf Ghani or Hamidullah Mohib would not have a place. And this had been, after all, from February onwards, there has been talk that Ashraf Ghani should step down to make way for a transitional government. Now, he had refused to do that. He had said that he was open to having early elections and then transferring power to whoever won the election. But he wanted to do the transfer of power through that route. Under the circumstances, I think they just found it expedient to leave because even if reports are to be believed, Dr. Abdullah was already approaching the Taliban, saying that would they declare a ceasefire were Ashraf Ghani to step down. This news was already, these rumors, shall I say, were already trickling in.
Right.
And that is why I think it was quite clear that Ashraf Ghani's days were numbered.
Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, the expediency that Rakesh Sood speaks about, now the way the Taliban sort of has overrun Afghanistan in the last 1 week, taking capital after capital, and the Afghan army has simply capitulated. Were you surprised?
Yeah, I certainly expected. I expected a Taliban military takeover, but I didn't expect there to be almost absolutely no resistance. One would have thought that it would have been a slightly more protracted takeover that would have perhaps spanned the period between August and say the winter after the US troops had finally pulled out. What has been a surprise has been that they have actually pursued this even before the US left, in the full knowledge that the US was not going to change its plans. and that they did it with the kind of speed and the strategy and the tactics that they involved. There was clearly a sort of deep mastermind behind that. And I think as far as the collapse of the government and the ANDSF is concerned, I mean, there are structural issues, there are psychological issues, but long and short, and there are technical, there are material issues, but the long and short of it is that the speed in which things have happened has really caught people by surprise. The Afghans are in a state of shock, in a state of feeling a sense of abandonment and betrayal, resignation. They don't know what to think. They don't know what has happened. There are whispers of kind of whispered instructions to Afghan units to simply walk away and
whispers by who? Who is doing the whispering?
Well, the whispers are, I'm just talking to you about what people in Afghanistan are saying. They are whispering that various people, including people within the government, sent out those instructions. And so there is a kind of atmosphere of, full of conspiracy theories. But the bottom line is a sense of betrayal, A, by the Americans, and B, by their own parts of their own leadership.
Ambassador Prasad, can I ask you to pick up on that thread? This betrayal on the part of the Americans as well as on the part of the Afghan leadership. What do you make of that? Who is to blame for the mess and the chaos in Afghanistan today?
Actually, there are three players, not two. The United States, Pakistan, and the Afghan government, the erstwhile Afghan government. But there I would say that all three betrayed the Afghan people, because the Americans betrayed, that was apparent from the time of the Doha Agreement, because the Doha Agreement protagonists were both united on the one objective of the agreement, which was the exit of the American forces from Afghanistan. So there was no negotiation. The Taliban wanted it and the Americans wanted it, so they had it. And they didn't care about the Afghan government or people. And the Afghan government anyway was blindsided. So the second was the Pakistanis said that they were playing an honest progress game, but they were not. They were advising the Taliban. They were wanting the American forces to go. So it was equally a victory for Pakistan. And finally, you asked the question previously, why did the Afghan security forces not stand up and fight? They didn't do that because they didn't know who the enemy was, because they found that their own president was hobnobbing with the enemy. Because Ashraf Ghani, since May, since he didn't want to step down, as Rakesh put it, the Americans wanted him to step down. Former President Karzai wanted him to step down. Abdullah wanted him to step down. But he dug his heels. And the British General Nicholas Carter came forward in May. He had served earlier in Afghanistan. He's the Chief of General Staff in UK. And he was doing shuttle diplomacy between Islamabad and Kabul, selling to President Ghani the idea that he could stay on for 6 months under a transitional arrangement which would have the Taliban also in it, which Bajwa said he would try to arrange. So Bajwa visited Kabul.
Bajwa as in the Pakistani Army Chief General.
Of course, in the company of the British general. They went and saw President Ghani and spoke to him. And till the end, these confabulations were going on. So the Afghan defense minister was appointed about 6 weeks ago, Bismillah Khan. He was the person who had walked into Kabul 20 years ago, and the Taliban had fled Kabul from the north. Right. He was the head of the Northern Alliance Army. Mm-hmm. Bismillah Khan was appointed defense minister but not allowed to act. So he said that he had his hands tied behind his back. And the army chief was being run from the presidential palace. Mm-hmm. And the army chief was changed 3 days ago, who was also an Ahmadzai, like President Ghani. Just 3 days ago. And they put General Alizai there. So the army thought that it's better not to lose their lives in such a situation. And the provincial council elders in province after province, they came to the decision that the loss of lives and property was not worth it, that it was better to do a deal with the Taliban, that it was better to surrender rather than face retribution. And that is what happened all over and also in Kabul.
Ambassador Sood, would you agree that the Americans primarily betrayed the Afghans and that a large chunk of the responsibility should be attributed to them?
Well, I think, betrayal is a very strong word in that sense.
Yes.
Because, as you know, what President Biden said is that he's not in the business, US is not in the business of nation building.
Right.
So he said that our objective was to dismantle the Al-Qaeda and to make sure that the territory of Afghanistan will not be used against US. Mm-hmm. And that we have ensured. And so that is why we upped and left. Now, I think the narrative here, what they created, that the US was engaged in a forever war, indefinite war, as it were.
Yeah.
I think that is a false narrative because for all practical purposes, the US war in Afghanistan had actually come to an end on 31st of December 2014, when President Obama declared an end to combat operations. Operation Enduring Freedom, which had begun in 2001 October, came to an end on 31st October 2014. It was replaced by Operation Resolute
Support.
Sentinel, Resolute Support or something.
Right.
Yeah. And if you look at the US casualties from that time, they have been at the rate of about a total of 96. That's it, in 6 years, that they were incurring by having that presence was a very marginal cost as far as the US defense budget is concerned.
Right.
And it wasn't also as if there was a strong anti-war feeling in the United States. Because 96 casualties, 96 soldiers dying in 6 years is not something that is going to create a massive anti-war sentiment of the kind that we saw during the Vietnam thing. Yeah. However, a kind of a narrative was built because the Pakistanis had taken the approach of trying to find some useful idiots in the West to convince them that this was a different Taliban.
Like who?
And this was a Taliban 2.0.
Like which kind of useful idiots?
Oh, there are a number of US academics. I'm sure you don't want me to take names.
Give me a couple of
them. Why do we want to get into names? You know them as well as I do.
Okay.
There were Europeans. Who were the people who were constantly going to Doha and getting ready to host the Taliban in their different countries to hold peace talks? There were any number of willing Europeans who did that.
You say that it is a different Taliban.
To say that it is a different Taliban. I mean, this is the line essentially that the Pakistanis had been telling the world. They had been telling the world consistently. And eventually, somewhere along the way, the Europeans and then obviously a certain US academics also bought into that line. And once that narrative took hold that this is a different kind of a Taliban and we should engage with them. And meanwhile, of course, the Taliban had gained a degree of legitimacy by opening an international office in Doha. So suddenly they were no longer in the shadows. They were now out in the open. International media was going and interviewing them. They were attending conferences. They were traveling to capitals. They were being received at the level of foreign ministers in Tehran, in Moscow, in Saudi Arabia, in Beijing, in elsewhere. Yeah. So, there was a growing sense of legitimacy which they had. And I think at the same time, many of these countries, whether it was Iran, whether it was Russia, whether it was China, and so on, were all saying that the US should leave. So,
right.
The continued US presence also was an irritant, which was, so as Jayant said, there was if there was a betrayal, I don't think you can put it at the door of one single party. I mean, the government in Kabul also did not enjoy legitimacy. I mean, both the elections in 2014 and 2019 were highly disputed.
Ambassador Sood, I'm going to ask you to hold your thought there. Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, can I ask you to pick up on what Ambassador Sood just said about this being a different Taliban, or the attempt to sell a different Taliban within quotes to the rest of the world?
I don't maintain that it is a different Taliban.
Right.
We don't have any
by the Western, absolutely.
Yeah, but that is the line that was being given. That is the pup that was being sold to the willing idiots.
So this line that was being attempted to be sold to the rest of the world by Western powers, whether it's the US or the UK or others. Now, you know the Taliban since 2001 when you reopened India's mission. How different do you think, in your view, was the Taliban of 1996 to 2001, the 5 years that they ruled in Afghanistan, and today?
Look, this idea of a changed Taliban completely flies in the face of realities and facts. In the last 6 months, we are talking about just this year, they have attacked maternity hospitals, they have attacked girls' schools. Very often they have been minority institutions, they have attacked mosques with children. They have targeted killings against a whole range of civil society, media and other people. They have brutally killed journalists. They are hunting down journalists in places like Kandahar and Jalalabad, particularly anyone who's been associated with foreigners. They have declared, in the past that their jihad will not end with the US occupation. It will end when every last vestige of foreign influence is erased. And in the meantime, we are also seeing now, in addition, things like forced marriages. Actually, the scale of atrocities that we are seeing, that includes everything from war crimes to crimes against humanity. And in the case of the Hazaras, a case, or at least an accusation, that they have enabled a kind of a pre-genocide, campaign, is actually comparable. May not be exactly comparable, but it's comparable to the ISIS. The difference is this, that the ISIS was treated as a pariah and attacked, and the Taliban are being whitewashed. And they are being whitewashed only to enable the United States and the West to pull out, apparently, as gracefully as possible. But that has not happened. So, they have neither got what they wanted, and in the process, I would actually maintain that they have betrayed the Afghan people, because they knew exactly what they were doing. 3 trillion in treasure, 2,500 lives, all the associates of the Americans, they have dumped that. They have dumped that and they have left. And I think the reason why they have done that is they came to the conclusion they never had a strategic view of Afghanistan. They came in, as Jayant said, for a counter-terrorist operation against specifically the Al-Qaeda. They expanded it based on their learnings from Iraq into a counter-insurgency operation up to a point, with up to the Obama surge. Converted it then into a training and equipping mission. And finally, they've decided that they don't need to be there and fight the Taliban. And provide net security to their strategic rivals, China, Russia, and Iran. So they have simply cold-bloodedly backed out. And the benign explanation is that they have left it to the region to sort it out. The more motivated, or the more realistic thing could be that simply they have set the Taliban upon the region, regardless of the collateral damage to the Afghans, to India, to the Central Asian republics. In fact, the whole US Taliban deal, as I think Jayant said, facilitates, in fact, it put the Taliban much above where they were, both on the diplomatic table as well as on the battlefield, and actually enabled, it virtually invited them to take over. And Pakistan knew this. See, Pakistan has raised and nurtured the Taliban. They ensured that the Afghan National Army, and I think this was a point about the collapse that I forgot to mention, they ensured that the Afghan National Army was not a national army. It was purely a counter-terrorist special force unit, kind of army. They had nothing. They were not an army that was capable of holding territory and defending their country. This was done because Pakistan ensured it with the various leverages and sensitivities that it had and the narratives that it created. And they've just waited for the day when the US was sure to pull out, and planned for this day and masterminded this and moved in with a very clear tactical military plan. And they've executed it exactly. What is only thing that has surprised me is that they didn't even wait for the Americans to leave Kabul. And they've really embarrassed the Americans by these 15 days. In 15 days, they've stopped the Americans. That means they didn't even hold the US Taliban deal as sacrosanct in any way.
Ambassador Prasad, can I ask you two questions? The first is that on social media, at least, the Russians and the Chinese have actually kept very, very quiet. And the Russians also don't seem to be particularly worried. So do you think that they would perhaps be amongst the first to recognize the Taliban? And my second question to you is the India question. What should India do? But first, if you could respond with the Russia-China question.
I'll start with China. A lot of people think that China was heavily invested in Afghanistan. It was not. They signed the ABAC copper mine deal in 2007 when Rakesh was still in Kabul. And it's the largest copper deposit in the world. Aside from building a boundary wall and some prefab housing, not a single kilo of copper has gone from there to China. There has been no real investment. China talks about the CPEC being extended to Afghanistan.
Yes.
That's not going to happen easily. The Chinese motive in Afghanistan is to see that ETIM doesn't prosper and doesn't enlarge itself and doesn't threaten their interest in Xinjiang province.
Mm-hmm.
So they were depending on Pakistan earlier, and now they want to do direct dealing with the Taliban. So initially Pakistan was resistant, but the Chinese convinced the Pakistanis by their good behavior, by deferring to Pakistan. So when you talk to the Chinese face to face, separately, they say that they are worried about the situation. But the moment you talk about Pakistan, they say Pakistan has made great sacrifices in the combat against terrorism. Okay. And they defend Pakistan. So their view of Afghanistan is very much still a Pakistan-centric view of Afghanistan. So,
right.
But you are right in your suggestion that the Chinese and the Russians might follow Pakistan in recognizing the new Taliban regime as and when it is established in Kabul.
Right.
The Russians, by the way, have a Vietnam-type complex that existed in the United States vis-a-vis Vietnam. The Russians have still not got over the licking that they got in Afghanistan. After all, that was instrumental also partly in the disintegration of the former Soviet Union.
That's
They
right.
have not forgotten that. And they wanted the Americans out of Afghanistan, just as the Americans themselves wanted out, and the Taliban wanted out, and the Pakistanis wanted them out, so also the Russians wanted them out. So also the Iranians wanted them out. So I think in the short term, the Russians will celebrate rather than bemoan the fact that Taliban is reigning supreme.
Right. Ambassador Sood, can I ask, I'm going to ask each of you the India question, so can I start with you? What do you think India should have done, and can India do more than what it is today?
Well, India, whatever India could have done now, you have a situation that, which is based on today's reality. Today's reality is that it's a fluid environment. The Taliban is certainly in control.
Yes.
And we will see what kind of a system of governance the Taliban are going to put into place. There are reports that senior Taliban leaders are coming in to take charge, etc., etc. How will the Taliban distribute the, the gains that they have made?
Spoils of power, yeah.
Exactly. The spoils of power between the fighters, the commanders on the ground, between the various senior fellows who come in from Doha or from Quetta or from elsewhere. What kind of deals do they do with the other groups like the ETIM and so on and so on?
Sure.
So all of that is something that we'll have to see. Now, all of this will create, obviously, a situation which is quite disturbed in many ways. We don't have any linkages with these. So under the circumstances, if there is a vacuum, if there is instability, violence levels are likely to go up because everybody carries guns in that society.
Okay.
So I think as far as India is concerned, it is very clear we should just leave. The first responsibility of the government is to secure Indian lives and save Indian lives.
You should pack up your
And we
bag.
should just, absolutely, we should just pack up whatever the Indian community there. I was reading somewhere that there are maybe about 200 Indians who are still stuck in Kabul. In addition to that, there will be people in the embassy. I think we should just pack up and leave. We should send in a military aircraft to evacuate them because the commercial flights have been stopped. Only military aircraft are being allowed to operate out of Kabul. The ATC is under US control. And we should send in a military aircraft, as other countries like France, New Zealand, Canada, etc. are doing, to evacuate their nationals and just get out, and we'll wait and see how the situation stabilizes, whether the new system wants to engage, whether we want to engage, etc. I mean,
Right.
that is because we have not kept any other options open. We did not engage with anybody. We put all our eggs in the basket of the government in Kabul, namely President Ghani's government, which is no more, and in the American basket. And the Americans are leaving, and most probably they're closing their embassy as well.
So that implies to me that India should not have put all its eggs in the American basket.
Well, we should have. I'm not saying that we could have reversed the tide of the Taliban takeover, but we could certainly have planned better. We could have, if we realized that this is what was happening, and the Taliban, if the Taliban were not willing to give us any security assurances, any guarantees, etc., we could have done the evacuation in a more organized fashion. Right now, you are reduced to scrambling to do your evacuation. So at least we could have planned better.
Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, what do you think India could have done better, and why do you think it's scrambling today?
Yeah. So, certainly it's possible that India should have done more politically, should have done more economically, should have done more diplomatically. I think India could have been much more active in the UN Security Council during its presidency by actually front placing the Afghan issue rather than, say, maritime security. But I think all that is actually academic, because even if one had tried to do things, I don't think we had actually much influence on the ground. What we did in terms of development projects, we earned the goodwill that we had. And I think that was, a reasonably good achievement. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we did not do, which I think is a very important positive, is that we did not legitimize. We resisted the temptation of actually legitimizing the Taliban when the rest of the world did. And that is something that at least the post-born generation that is against and not in tune at all with the Taliban and opposed to them and recognize the hand of Pakistan behind the Taliban will be grateful for. That we did not prioritize our narrow selfish interests and negotiate behind the backs of the Afghan government and people with the Taliban, but that we showed our willingness to talk to the Taliban in the context of a larger peace process, which is what we did in Doha.
So did you leave a little too late, because this only happened?
No, that's all right. But, the point being that, there is the reality of the kind of Taliban that we have. I mean, I'm not sure that any security guarantee that could have been given by any faction of the Taliban could have been relied on, would have been worth the paper on, because simply the Taliban, the Pakistanis have, other horses in the race. If, let's say, we had agreed with one faction, they would have utilized another faction to put you into jeopardy and insecurity. So there's no guarantee that you could accept. There's nothing that we can get from the Taliban. They're not going, just because you talk to them, they're not going to dump Pakistan one day and embrace you the next day and become your strategic partners in Afghanistan. I think let's be clear about that. And if that is not what you're getting, then it's better to stay with the friends that you have made over the last 25 years during the previous struggle against the Taliban and subsequently. And this is the new generation. And, please don't mistake the kind of collapse that has taken place with political support for the Taliban. Yes, the Ghani government made mistakes, but we did not support Ghani. We supported the Islamic Republic. We supported the constitution, and we supported the Afghan people. And Ghani, he was a disaster. But let's not, yes, maybe we could have done more to ensure that Ghani went. But, there are also certain limitations that we have. So I think the fact that we did not legitimize the Taliban is an achievement.
Ambassador Prasad, can I ask you to come in here? Do you think that India put a lot of its eggs in the American basket, knowing that the Americans had handed over the key to Afghanistan's future to the Pakistanis?
Contrary to the public perception that Indian views and American views are congruous on Afghanistan, they have never been, and they were not even now. But there are very important people who pretended that they were. That is the mistake. I don't think we agitated the Afghan issue as much as we should have with the Americans. Because if we had a different view, it was our duty to explain it to our friends, which we didn't.
But perhaps the Indo-US relationship is such a strong one that you didn't want to damage it by allowing differences to come in the way. I'm only speculating.
Yeah, it is also true that there is a strong view in India that Afghanistan is not worth the while to vitiate a relationship which is very important with the United States. But the example of what has happened in Afghanistan should have some impact on this vital relationship for India, because it raises larger questions of credibility, of long-term commitment, of how much another country is willing to stand up for its stated purposes and objectives, and so on. So there are important lessons for us from what has happened. What has happened has happened. It's no point speculating now on what could we have done better. Now, the problem is that Vice President Amrullah Saleh was said to have left with Ghani for Tajikistan. But that's not true. He has gone to Panjshir to join forces with Ahmad Masood, the son of Commander Masood. But Commander Masood himself is in double mind about what he should do. He has said that he is willing to negotiate with the Taliban for the sake of amity and avoiding bloodshed. So the thing is that the situation on the ground is far, far ahead of any contingency planning that we may have done. Mm-hmm. So our position today is one of adjusting to reality and sitting back and watching the dust settling down, because the horses have bolted the stables. So there is no point closing the stable doors now. Now is the time to see what happens and see whether, as Gautam put it, whether there are people in Afghanistan who in the last 20 years have gained from whatever happened there, who are willing to fight for their rights, and whether the Taliban, as they have told us, or as they pretend that they are the new Taliban, if they show themselves to be moderate, if they show themselves to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, about which I have serious doubts, then India can adjust its policies. But we have to essentially wait and watch.
Right.
We have to get Indian nationals out. We have to get our loyal local staff and their dependents out, because they will be vulnerable and they will be marked. But I feel that the Taliban may not, in the initial days, crackdown as they have in the provincial cities. In Kabul, my feeling is that they would want to be recognized by more and more countries. They would want to have development assistance continue to flow to Afghanistan. And for these two reasons, they are likely to behave themselves if senior Taliban leaders arrive on the spot. But it is very difficult for them to change their colors. So we'll have to play the long game in Afghanistan because we are part of the extended neighborhood of Afghanistan. We don't share a contiguous border, but we have stakes there, and our projects have earned us goodwill there.
Yes.
And we should see that there is no very long hiatus that develops between us and the Afghan people. That we should avoid.
Ambassador Sood, you have absolutely the last word. What does this do to India's image in the neighborhood? Both Ambassador Jayant Prasad and Ambassador Mukhopadhyay have referred to it. And some people who have been talking to me elsewhere in the region say that India should have done much more, including sending weapons or other help, military help, and should have stayed the course and perhaps bolstered or empowered the Afghans much more.
Well, I think the question is, if the Afghan National Army, if the Afghan National Security Forces just melted away or capitulated, despite the fact that they had equipment, despite the fact that they had the numbers on their side, then why did it happen? Clearly, it happened because they didn't have the will to fight. So I don't think first of all, there are very clear limitations in terms of what kind of military supplies we could have given to the Taliban, to the Afghan National Security Forces that would have helped them to keep the Taliban at bay. I don't think so. I don't think that is material at all. However, what is clear is that for whatever reasons that we've already discussed, the Afghan army, the Afghan security forces did not have the will to fight.
Yeah, but
they lost the will.
Sure. No, my question is that India came out as Afghanistan or the Afghanistan government's and the people's biggest friend and ally, especially in the region, not just in South Asia, but in the larger region as well. Now, here is India scrambling to get out. Now, what does this do to India's image?
Well, it shows that we were short-sighted. We did not, we just decided that we would, as I said earlier, we put all our eggs in one basket, and which is why we are where we are in terms of scrambling to get out. Today, we don't have any other option. And in being short-sighted, we kind of closed our options. As I said earlier, it is not that by engaging with the Taliban, we could have necessarily developed friendship with them or got them to change their colors or, brought about a split between them and Pakistan. But we could have come to our own conclusions. We could have started thinning down the embassy earlier. We could have started getting the Indians out earlier. We could have started making all these arrangements earlier. Now we are in a situation where we are behind the curve instead of being ahead of the curve. I mean, we could have, if we had foreseen that Kabul was going to fall, what is to prevent us from closing the embassy earlier? That is the point I'm making.
Well, the next few days and weeks and months will be, I'm sure the situation will evolve on a daily basis. But until then, Ambassador Rakesh Sood, Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, and Ambassador Jayant Prasad, thank you, all of you, so much for your time for speaking to The Print.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti, and thank you, Jayant and Rakesh. Bye.
Thanks, Gautam. Thanks, Jayant.